amongst the countless heroes within the Adeptus Astartes, one chapter stands above all others in honor, discipline, and sheer strategic and societal influence. These are the Ultramarines. For 10,000 years, they have served as paragons of the Emperor's design, a force of unparalleled strength and order that have shaped the fate of the Imperium and humanity itself. Forged in the crucible of the Great Crusade, the Ultramarines once marched as the 13th Space Marine Legion, but it was in the dark and gory aftermath of the Horus Heresy that they secured their place in history as being one of the primary contributors to preventing the collapse of Imperial rule. Under the command of their primarch, Guilliman, they not only rebuilt the shattered Imperium, but redefined it and restructured what was left of the Emperor's domain. As Lord Commander and Imperial Regent, Guilliman's reforms during the time of rebirth reshaped the Adeptus Astartes forever, breaking the legions into individual chapters and codifying their doctrine in the Codex Astartes, much to the chagrin of many of his brothers and a litany of Astartes themselves. At this point, the Ultramarines' name is more than just a title. It is a legacy that signifies their origins, their vast influence, and their unmatched role in the proliferation of the Adeptus Astartes. No other first founding legion has sired more successor chapters or spread its gene seed as widely. Unfortunately, that also entails the fact that no other first founding legion has contributed to more traitors in recent years. Within the segmentum Ultima, the Ultramarines rule the prosperous subsector of Ultramar, a rare anomaly in the Imperium where order and civility thrive. From their homeworld of Macragge, they oversee a realm that mirrors the martial and civic virtues of Terra's ancient Rome. Its culture reflected in their high Gothic traditions, military hierarchy, and their almost religious, unyielding adherence to the Codex Astartes. To the uncounted billions, if not trillions, of Imperial citizens, the Ultramarines are the very embodiment of the Adeptus Astartes, as they are heroic, virtuous, and unwavering in their duty. They rose from the shadows of the Horus Heresy and spread themselves to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, where they have waged war against the traitor, the alien, and the demon, to the point that their deeds have been immortalized in devotional texts, their victories celebrated even in the records of the Imperial Palace. Even amongst the warrior elite of the Adeptus Astartes, the Ultramarines hold a singular distinction. Their legacy is not merely one of battlefield prowess, but genetic purity, strategic brilliance, and their overall influence on not only the Imperium, but other Adeptus Astartes. It is estimated that nearly 2/3 of all Space Marine chapters can trace their lineage back to the Ultramarines, either as direct successors or as distant inheritors of their gene seed. This vast network of kinship extends far beyond mere heritage, as when the Ultramarines take to the field, their calls to arms are often answered by many others who share the genetic lineage and uphold their ideals. Their council also carries an unparalleled weight, only realistically being outstripped by legends such as Lord Commander Dante and High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars, for varying reasons. This means that in any regard, when a strategic assembly of Adeptus Astartes occurs, the word of an Ultramarine usually commands a higher amount of seniority, meaning that they are rarely ignored. Their reputation as one of the foremost defenders of humanity has been tested time and time again, and nowhere has this been more evident than in the Tyrannic Wars, in particular in their cosmic and climactic war against High Fleet Behemoth. When the mysterious Tyranid swarms struck the eastern fringes, it was the Ultramarines who bore the brunt of the assault, meeting the Xenos menace in a battle that would decide the fate of not only their homeworld, but of humanity in general. The war itself would rage across Macragge, culminating in one of the largest engagements seen in centuries. Under the command of the legendary Chapter Master Marneus Calgar, the Ultramarines fought with an unmatched tenacity, ultimately halting the Tyranid advance, but this came at a terrible cost. Their entire first company, comprised of their most seasoned veterans, was annihilated in this struggle. The sacrifice, however, was not in vain. From this, the Ultramarines would emerge, not only victorious, but armed with a hard-won knowledge of the Tyranid threat, and a myriad of Tyrannic war veterans who had become experts in dealing with this particular threat. The experience they gained has since been disseminated across the Adeptus Astartes as a whole, often through service in the Death Watch, ensuring that other chapters too are prepared should the Great Devourer appear within their regions. Yet the Ultramarines' most defining moment was not a single battle, but their role as the architects of the Imperium's survival time and time again. During the Horus Heresy, their destiny was shaped not on the bloodied plains of Terra, but in the void of the Ruinstorm, within a vast warp-born maelstrom, which was unleashed by the Word-Bearers. that severed the galaxy in twine. Split from the throne world, the Ultramarines could only watch as the War Master led his traitorous legions in a direct assault upon the Emperor's palace. When at last they were freed from the warp's grip, they engaged and destroyed a vast traitor armada, but the siege at that point had already reached its tragic conclusion. The Emperor was lost to the Golden Throne, and the Great Angel was dead. It was in this darkest of hours that Guilliman cemented his legacy. With the Emperor entombed and the traitors in retreat, the Imperium stood leaderless. Its bureaucracy shattered, its armies scattered, and its worlds on the verge of ruination. It was Guilliman who decided to hold the Imperium together, orchestrating a vast series of reforms to its military and administrative structures, in particular in order to attempt to prevent any one individual from wielding the power of a legion or from wielding the combined force of humanity. As Lord Commander of the Imperium, he not only stymied the tides of anarchy, but he rebuilt the Imperium into something that could endure for the long war ahead. His Codex Astartes also reshaped the Adeptus Astartes into what they would be known for, ensuring that no singular rogue legion could ever threaten the Emperor's realms. His administrative genius also restored the failing bureaucracy, and his military foresight secured many, if not most, of the scattered remnants of humanity against those who would seek to prey upon their now weakened state. The Ultramarines are not just simple warriors. In this, they are the stewards of the Imperium's future. Their victories have shaped the present, and their sacrifices have paved the way for humanity and preserved the past, and their religious adherence to Guilliman's visions continues to guide the Imperium's course. Yet, as history has shown, even the mightiest of legacies are not without their flaws. Few figures in Imperial history loom as large as Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, for he is known primarily for his strategic brilliance, along with his military acumen and his devotion into ensuring the Imperium's survival above all else, in particular through the Horus Heresy. But even a demigod of war is not beyond the reach of treachery. There was an incident known as the Battle of Thalissa, which occurred in 121 M31, where Guilliman met his fate at the hands of his former brother, the Demon Primarch Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children. Struck down by a blade seeped with warp-borne toxins, his body mortally wounded, beyond even the aid of the most advanced Imperial medicine at the time. Yet he was not allowed to die, as the Ultramarines were able to get him within a stasis field and render him safe within suspended animation. Locked in a moment of agony, his broken form would be entombed within the heart of the Ultramarines' fortress monastery upon Macragge. There he remained, a relic of an age gone by, revered by his sons who carry his legacy, yet powerless to aid them, in essence a mirror to his own father. For 10 millennia, the Imperium endured without its greatest architect, but in the darkness of the 41st millennium, as chaos reached its zenith, Guilliman would once more rise. In the final days of the 13th Black Crusade, as the forces of chaos threatened to engulf the galaxy, the Primarch was resurrected, his life restored by an unprecedented fusion of Imperial science and Eldari mysticism. Now clad in the relic armor of his forebears and wielding the Emperor's own burning blade, Guilliman leads the Imperium once more as Lord Commander and Imperial Regent, as the sole Primarch to walk amongst the living in the era Indominus. That is, until more of his brothers could return. However, Guilliman's return was not merely a moment of triumph, it was a turning point in the Imperium's history. In the wake of his rebirth, the Great Rift tore the stars asunder, splitting the galaxy in twine once more, plunging vast swaths of humanity into a domain of chaos and darkness. The Imperium Nihilus, which would eventually fall under the command of Lord Commander Dante, was cut off from the Astronomicon's guiding light and teetered on the brink of collapse, and so Guilliman took command of the Imperium's shattered forces in order to lead the Indominus Crusade to reclaim as much of what was lost as he could. As it stands now, he is no longer just the Primarch of the Ultramarines, he is the Imperium's last and best hope for survival. There are many Space Marine chapters, each with their own proud traditions, battle honors, and martial creeds, but to the wider Imperium, none are as renowned, and as widely emulated or as deeply entrenched in the Imperium's structure as the Ultramarines. Statues of their Primarch and their greatest champions stand watch over the plazas and city gates of countless worlds, their victories in essence immortalized in the stained glass windows and mighty basilicas of the Imperials. To the untold billions if not trillions of the Emperor's subjects, the Ultramarines are not merely warriors, they are the embodiment of the Adeptus Astartes. The origins of this reputation lies in their unmatched legacy, as during the Great Crusade, the Ultramarines were indeed the largest of the Emperor's many legions, numbering well above the hundreds of thousands, and when Guilliman enacted the second founding in the wake of the Horus Heresy, it was the 13th that contributed the greatest number of successor chapters to the Imperium's overall defense. Even now, 10,000 years later, their gene seed with some exceptions exceptions, remains the gold standard for creating new chapters, as its stability, in combination with their direct connections to the Imperium's structure, is in essence unrivaled. It is no exaggeration to say that the majority of Space Marines in existence today, knowingly or not, are Guilliman's warriors, to the point that even some Blood Angel successors and some Imperial Fist successors have been falsely identified as Ultramarine successors in the past. After that, the fact that the Codex Astartes is in essence Guilliman's penultimate work of both wisdom and strategic military genius, having been enshrined as the gold standard for Space Marines with its vast set of doctrina, guiding philosophies, and both Xenos along with artifact knowledge, has been the basis for how the Space Marines fight for the last 10,000 years. Within these pages, Guilliman laid the framework for the Imperium's overall military structure, ensuring that order could endure even in the face of unending, ceaseless war. Here with the Codex Astartes, we see both a doctrine of war and a bulwark against the horrors that nearly consumed the Imperium in the wake of the Horus Heresy, and to this day. It is one of the primary reasons why the Ultramarines remain the template against which all other Space Marine chapters are measured upon. In essence, if you follow the structure laid out within the Codex to a T, or mostly to a T, you're considered Codex compliant. If not, that makes many within the Imperium rather uncomfortable. The task before Reboot Guilliman, as he created the Codex Astartes, pulled together the fragmenting remnants of the Imperium, was nothing short of monumental, as humanity's greatest accomplishment teetered on the brink of collapse, ravaged by war, treachery, and the near loss of the Emperor himself. In order to restore the galaxy shattered by the Horus Heresy, he understood that humanity needed more than the strength of arms, as it demanded unparalleled discipline and a united vision, along with the resolve to carry that vision out. No ordinary man could have shouldered such a burden without succumbing to absolute despair, but Guilliman was no ordinary man. His leadership became a lifeline to a dying and decaying empire, a beacon of stability in an era of unremittent chaos. While none could ever replace the Emperor in the hearts and minds of humanity, Guilliman was a firm hand that the Imperium so desperately needed at the time, leading to his name spreading throughout the stars, whispered in both reverence and relief by countless scores of humans who saw him as a glimmer of hope. Where others faltered, he imposed order. Where others despaired, he rebuilt. The Imperium would see it as Guilliman being the one who stemmed the anarchy and reforged the shattered institutions of the Imperium, ensuring that humanity's dominion, while wounded and bleeding, would indeed endure. However, he was no fool. Guilliman understood that his own lifespan, though vastly longer than that of an ordinary man, was still finite. He knew that he could not lead directly forever, and that even a primarch was not immune to the brutal realities of war. The Horus Heresy had already proven that the Emperor's genesons were not invincible or immortal men, but fallible creations of flesh and blood. Many had been slain, others lost to the warp, and more still had turned to damnation. Guilliman's own end was not unimaginable, and so he prepared for the inevitability that he saw as only he could, by committing the entirety of his vast work of knowledge and military genius into his writings. Of all of Guilliman's works, none would shape the Imperium as profoundly as the Codex Astartes, as this book not only included strategy, battle drills, and contingencies, as it was a doctrine of war, but it also contained the codification of wisdom drawn from centuries of warfare, along with administrative influence drawn from his own lifespan, and that of the greatest minds of the age of the Imperium. The Codex Astartes was not just a blueprint for the Astartes, as it detailed everything from battlefield formations to how recruitment would be done, training regiments, unit organization, even heraldry and administrative duties. With the induction of the Codex Astartes, Guilliman shattered the Legion system of old, dividing vast armies of Astartes into smaller, more manageable, specialized chapters. Though controversial, this decision was a safeguard for the Imperium against the rise of another potential war master, and while it weakened them to outside threats, it reinforced their ability to counter internal upheaval. It also ensured that in the event of his absence, his principles would endure, and endure they did. Across 10,000 years of unrelenting warfare, the Codex Astartes would become scripture, respected, studied, and in some cases, worshipped. Amongst the Ultramarines and their successors, it is more than just a doctrine. It is the very foundational text which guides their existence. It governs how they fight, how they recruit, how they operate in the service of the Imperium, even how they eat, sleep, and think. Even in an era where the galaxy burns in a perpetual war, Guilliman's wisdom is enshrined in its pages, allowing it to guide humanity's greatest warriors. The Ultramarines in particular remain keepers of Guilliman's vision. More than any other chapter, they embody the ideals he sought to instill. At times they chain themselves too tightly to those ideals, but this is to be expected as they see themselves as the guardians of the Codex Astartes, not just as a military guide, but as a way of life for both the Astartes and humanity as a whole, as many of its teachings have been integrated into Ultramar's human society. And now with the Primarch's return, it seems that the unshakable foundation of the Codex Astartes is shifting by the will of its own author. Amongst the countless dominions of the Imperium, there exists one that stands apart, not by rebellion or decree, but by tradition, honor, and its immortal founders. This is Ultramar, a bastion of stability in a galaxy consumed by ceaseless warfare. This is a realm that neither pays tithes to the Imperium, nor depends on the crumbling bureaucracy of Terra for its survival. It is a dominion ruled not by planetary governors or corrupt officials, but by warrior priests, the Ultramarines themselves. To the countless souls that inhabit Ultramar's worlds, the Ultramarines are more than just distant saviors or mythical figures, glimpsed only in Imperial propaganda or when the worst has come to pass. They are rulers, protectors, in some cases even kin. While the vast majority of humanity will never see a space marine outside of battle or Imperial propaganda, the people of Ultramar live in the shadows of these great giants. It is not uncommon for a family to whisper of a distant ancestor chosen to ascend into the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes, who is still walking amongst them to this day, his name carved into the records of a fortress monastery long ago. Yet for all their might, the Ultramarines do not rule alone. They adhere to a higher principle, the legacy that their Primarch attempted to instill. Each battle brother is taught that leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege, and that governance of Ultramar is a duty no less sacred than war itself, as a large part of the structure and the bureaucracy is actually indeed filled by humans. Their dominion is not one of subjugation, but of stewardship, a continuation of many, if not most, of the ideals of the era of the Imperial truth. To govern justly is to honor their Primarch's teachings, and to fail in this duty is a betrayal of their raison d'etre. Due to their adherence to the Codex Astartes as not merely a manual of war, but a philosophical text, and how close they stick to its teachings to a precise detail, leads them, unlike many of their more brutal kin, to not rely on psycho-conditioning to implant knowledge. Instead, they commit each and every one of their aspirants to an existence of relentless study and mastering every last tenet through sheer will and discipline. Each battle brother will spend centuries analyzing, deciphering, and committing the Codex Astartes to memory, dissecting its every passage with the same intensity that others might devote to the art of war itself. Over time, he will become a warrior and a scholar, his mind sharpened as keenly as his blade. Within a company, especially within the lower numbered companies, where veterans of many campaigns serve, the collective knowledge of the Codex Astartes is not just understood, but lived. The captain of such a force wields more than just the might of battle-hardened warriors. He commands a brotherhood of tacticians, each well versed in the nuances of warfare that Guilliman himself once envisioned. To stand amongst these veterans is to stand with some of the most learned warriors the Imperium has ever produced, in essence living conduits for the Codex Astartes, men whose minds are as formidable as their bolters, who see war not as chaos, but as a disciplined dance, bound by rules, logic, and honor. And so in every campaign and in every war zone, the Ultramarines bring their might to bear. It is not just their weapons that shape the battlefield. It is the wisdom of eons and the unbroken legacy of their Primarch that brings salvation to humanity. For 10,000 years, the Ultramarines have waged a war in strict adherence to the Codex Astartes, even to the detriment of their own, such as Captain Titus, now Lieutenant. In large part, this detriment comes as seeing that breaking from the guidance is to reject the very foundation of the Imperium's military strength, and to bite their thumb at their father. This is something that the Ultramarines will not abide. This is due to their rigid discipline, which is not confined solely to the chapter, as it extends outward, woven into the very fabric of their dominion, Ultramar. Here, from birth, the citizenry is raised with an unshakable belief in duty and honor, the teachings of Guilliman, which were best extrapolated for their human followers. As the people of Ultramar are taught that strength is found in discipline. This is to the point that when a rebellion occurred within the realm of Ultramar, once it was subdued, the Ultramarines were not upset at the rebellion itself. They were upset at the fact that those leading the rebellion were undisciplined in their very rebellion. For the Ultramarines and those who believe in Guilliman's teachings, things are clear. To stray from the Codex Astartes is to invite ruination, as they have seen many of their less Codex compliant kin fall to chaos. It is to question 10 millennia of wisdom, and to abandon said discipline is to fall within the same path as those who left their father in a mortally wounded state. And it is because of this that amongst the myriad of chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, none has held themselves to a higher standard for adherence to the Codex Astartes than the Ultramarines. As mentioned before, this adherence to the Codex Astartes is not merely a matter of discipline. It is a zealously followed religious adherence, in essence seeing it as a binding contract with their own primarch, often to the detriment of their own forces. To many within the Ultramarines, the Codex Astartes is more than just a tactical doctrine. It is the guiding light of the Emperor's avenging son, and the Ultramarines see it as their solemn duty to embody this vision, to serve as the paragons of what a Space Marine chapter, as espoused by the Codex Astartes, should be. Yet this is a self-appointed role which has earned them a reputation amongst their peers. Some admire their unshakable discipline, while other more independent-minded chapters, such as the Space Wolves or the Flesh Terrors, regard them as rigid, ineffectual, and arrogant. Even amongst their own loyal successors, such as the Mortifactors, there is severe friction over the Ultramarines' dogmatic interpretation of the Codex Astartes, as deviation is not tolerated. To break faith with the Codex Astartes is not simply an error, it is heresy of the utmost order. And for the Ultramarines, to whom discipline and structure are what separate loyalists from the damned, to allow oneself to stray, even with the noblest of intentions, is to take the first step towards complete and irredeemable corruption, which they believe will inevitably lead them to the same fate as that of the traitor legions. This belief is enforced with absolute severity. Those who defy the Codex Astartes may face a death oath, which is a grim sentence of exile that condemns them to inflict self-termination in their own singular war against the forces of chaos deep within the Eye of Terror, while at other times they may be stripped of their chapter's identifying marks and any connection with the chapter as a whole and given over to the Death Watch on what amounts to a permanent basis, with a few exceptions of course. However, despite their strict adherence to the doctrina given to them by their Gene-Sire, the Ultramarines are anything but mindless automatons. Guilliman instilled with them a strategic philosophy that balances two fundamental concepts: the theoretical, the study of tactics, precedent, and careful planning, and the practical, the ability to adapt, improvise, and or execute actions effectively on the battlefield. A warrior of Ultramar is expected to embody both, ensuring that knowledge is not merely memorized, but applied to and added on to with the utmost precision. This balance reflects its founders' belief that victory is not achieved through blind obedience, but through wisdom, discipline, and the ability to learn from failure. Guilliman himself, as the architect of the Codex Astartes, never intended it to be a shackle. He valued tactical independence far beyond what his sons do. And the Ultramarines' strict discipline and devotion to the Codex Astartes has caused him no shortage of ire after his return. But he does find examples of individuals who understand that the Codex Astartes is not to be followed to an extreme like a shackle of dogma. Beyond the battlefield, the Ultramarines' culture is profoundly shaped by their stewardship of Ultramar. Unlike many of their brethren who see humans as lesser beings, the Ultramarines uphold Guilliman's vision of a just but strict Imperium. They do not merely rule Ultramar, they are to protect and uplift it. The people of this realm are not to be subjugated, they are not subjects, but guided through generations of careful governance. And to this end, they have flourished under the watchful eye of their transhuman guardians, fitting the role that the Emperor seems to have had for the Space Marines. This close relationship to humanity instills in the Ultramarines a rather unusual perspective amongst the Adeptus Astartes, one only realistically surpassed by the Salamanders. They hold human life as sacred and will go to great lengths to protect it. Were they to encounter corruption, greed, or tyranny within the Imperium, they will be merciless in their condemnation. The harsh realities of the wider Imperium, where exploitation and suffering are the norm, stand as a dark contrast to the order and prosperity of Ultramar, something that the Ultramarines pride themselves in. This attitude has not gone unnoticed, as during the invasion of Ultramar in 999 M41, Inquisitor Narima Suzaku of the Order Malleus made a striking observation on the world of Calth. She and her entourage were met with curiosity rather than fear. Nowhere else in the Imperium had she seen people so unburdened by guilt, so assured by their own righteousness, that they showed no apprehension before the agents of the Inquisition. Even in the wake of the Great Crusade, as the newly created Primarch Space Marines bolstered the ranks of the Ultramarines, subtle deviations began to emerge. Amongst some, the distinction between Primarchs and the original Astartes, now referred to as Firstborn, became a point of contention. Some, like Captain Cato Sicarius, reject the label as reductive, but the very existence of the term hints at the shifting identity of Guilliman's sons, and of the Astartes as a whole, in this new era of war. Still, at the core of their beliefs remains their unshakable belief in the grandeur of the Codex Astartes, and so the Ultramarines endure living by the standards of their primarch's ideals. Now, onto the organization of the Ultramarines, at least during the times of the legions. Before the fires of the Horus Heresy changed the Imperium forever, the Ultramarines stood as one of, if not the largest and most structured legions of the Adeptus Astartes. Unlike the rigid 1,000 warrior limit imposed on chapters after the Horus Heresy, the 13th Legion operated at a vastly grander scale, numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Their discipline and adherence to the tactical doctrines espoused by their primarch was a testament to said primarch's leadership. At the very heart of this force were equivalents to chapter masters, each commanding a formation of approximately 10,000 Space Marines. Beneath them, 10 companies of 1,000 warriors formed the core of these chapter-like formations, each led by the equivalent of captains who would ensure Guilliman's meticulous strategies were executed to the utmost perfection. However, the Ultramarines were not merely a force of rank-and-file soldiers. They maintained specialized formations that have since in essence faded from history. Among these are the Invictati, an elite warrior cadre, the Fulminantati, masters of heavy weapon, and the Locutati, battlefield orators and masters of morale, along with the Evocati, veterans of countless campaigns whose experience was second only to Guilliman himself. By observing this overall breakdown of the Legion's organization and structure, you can in essence see the hints and the very foundations of the chapter structure of the current Adeptus Astartes. Despite their vast numbers, the Ultramarines' naval strength was significantly more limited, as their navy was greatly outstripped by both the Blood Angels and, by an even larger margin, the Imperial Fist. However, Rabut Guilliman, ever the pragmatist, covered for these weaknesses by forging close alliances with the Imperialis Armada fleets of the Ultima Segmentum, recognizing that these strategic partnerships would yield greater results than using more of his own resources to gather more ships. While other legions, such as the Imperial Fists and the Death Guard, fielded larger numbers and notably more formidable capital ships, the Ultramarines fleet focused on a doctrine that emphasized on rapid deployment and quickly achieving planetary control over prolonged void warfare. The Ultramarines fleet itself was optimized primarily for planetary invasions, favoring battle barges and strike cruisers designed for swift and decisive engagements. Unlike the grandiose fleets of some of their contemporaries, the 13th Legion maintained relatively few heavy capital ships, no more than 30 to 35 at any given time. Many of these had served since the Legion's very inception, as their hulls had been reforged and refitted time and time again over the centuries of warfare. Newer capital ships were rarely assigned to the Ultramarines, with only a handful of high-grade vessels joining their ranks under Guilliman's command. Amongst these were two immensely powerful Gloriana-class battleships, titanic warships capable of turning the tide of battle. Yet even these ships were rarely seen as centerpieces for the Legion's military doctrine. Where the Ultramarines excelled in naval warfare was mobility and flexibility. Their fleet was composed of primarily mid-scaled cruisers, battle barges, and a vast array of strike cruisers, freighters, and fast patrol vessels. In particular, they were designed to be craft that could be constructed across shipyards of Ultramar itself, allowing for a measure of independence and sustainability for Ultramar if the worst were to happen. This strategic fleet structure allowed Guilliman's forces to deploy rapidly across multiple war zones at any time, with a statistically greater amount of consistency than their fellow legionaries. However, in terms of sheer firepower and fleet tonnage, the Ultramarines' Void Armada was ranked mid-tier amongst the Space Marine legions, outmatched by sheer firepower by the Imperial Fists and the Blood Angels, and overshadowed in the number of heavy capital ships by even the Death Guard. The Ultramarines' organizational hierarchy, on the other hand, extends well beyond the battlefield and is significantly more relied upon than their navy. While captains would lead individual companies during the times of the Great Crusade and the Heresy, Guilliman introduced additional layers of leadership in order to oversee the vast war efforts of his legion. Amongst these were the Tetrarchs, 4 high-ranking officials entrusted with governing Ultramar's core territories and commanding large-scale military operations. These Tetrarchs were more than merely governors. They were warriors of immense skill and trusted advisors to Guilliman himself, each overseeing a crucial sector of the Legion's expansive domain. Additionally, the Legion employed legitas or legitus officials tasked with commanding entire battle forces, often leading multi-detachment deployments into war zones that demanded strategic oversight beyond the authority of a single captain in order to ensure cohesion between various Ultramarine formations and executing Guilliman's overall vision for the battlefield at any one time. In the days before the Heresy, this system was a model of efficiency rivaled by few, and it was also a blueprint for order amidst the chaos of the Great Crusade. It is important to remember that throughout the vast dominion of Ultramar, there is no higher calling than to serve the Adeptus Astartes. The Ultramarines, sons of Guilliman, have upheld a rigorous recruitment tradition, selecting only the most exceptional candidates to join their ranks. Unlike many other chapters, who scour the stars for any and all worthy aspirants, the Ultramarines have no shortage of volunteers from their own populace. For the people of Ultramar, service in the chapter is the ultimate honor, a legacy woven into the very fabric of their society, one where many families will actively brag and boast about their bloodlines serving the chapter. Many families can trace generations of sons who have donned the blue and gold of the Ultramarines, each offering their lives and lineage to the defense of the Imperium. The Ultramarines chapter draws its recruits primarily from Ultima Auxilia Juvenetia, an elite military institution on Macragge, known for its grueling training regiments and the strict adherence to the principles of discipline and the Codex Astartes. Warriors of the Juveneta are battle-hardened even before they begin their transformation into transhumans, making them the ideal candidates for ascension to the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes. However, the selection alone is no guarantee for survival, as every aspirant must prove their worth through the trials of the chapter and be fortunate enough to have the genetic predispositions for the gene seed implants. The trials themselves would go as follows. The exposure trials are tests of endurance and survival. The aspirant will be cast into a hostile environment and left to fend for themselves. These trials often take place on death worlds, desert worlds, or ice worlds, where the environments themselves are seen as a lethal adversary. In other cases, a feral world may be used, or one of the more violent and uninhabitable hive cities would be chosen. The Ultramarines hold no illusion about the severity of these tests, as failure is almost certain. However, should aspirants succumb to the trial, yet display remarkable resilience and nobility, he may still be recovered by the chapter's apothecaries for further evaluation. This brutal rite is deeply ingrained in the culture of Ultramar, where even the families whose constant donations to its warrior elite are known have constantly subjected newborn infants to similar trials in order to see if they may someday become Ultramarines. The next trial is the Challenge Trial, and it is a test of combat prowess and sheer will. Here, an aspirant must face a fully initiated battle brother in single combat. Victory is not expected, nor is it a measure of success. Rather, the aspirant's ability to endure, adapt, and overcome will be judged. Here, the overwhelming majority of the challengers will fall swiftly, but their efforts will be scrutinized for further detail. On rare occasions, an aspirant might manage to defeat a battle brother. Said event will note the aspirant as a figure who might rise to be a legend in the chapter later. Those who survive these grueling training regiments and education within the barrack institutions of Ultramar will take their first step as chapter scouts, as prescribed by the Codex Astartes. It is in these early stages that their final transformation into full-fledged Space Marines will begin. Yet even amongst the strongest, there are those who will falter. Failure at this point is not tolerated within the ranks of the Ultramarines, and those who do not meet their chapter's excruciating standards face a far more morbid fate than just rejection. Some of the failed aspirants are repurposed as aspirant servitors, their minds wiped and their bodies reforged for menial labor. Others, however, serve one final brutal purpose. Their bodies and combat instincts are used as live test subjects for the next generation of recruits, ensuring that only those who are truly worthy ascend to the ranks of the Ultramarines. With that brief overview done, we can start on the history proper. And what better place to start than at the dawn of the Horus Heresy, in order to see a glimpse of the XIIIth Legion itself, who was known throughout the Imperium as the Ultramarines and stood as one of, if not the single most organized and formidable by size, military forces in the galaxy. Their numbers alone, a fighting force that exceeded 250,000 Space Marines, was a staggering and overwhelming display of strength. Their domain stretched across multiple systems known as the Ultima Segmentum, and one of their crowning jewels was the infrastructure that they had established, not only to train, but to supply their Astartes, ensured that even in the face of catastrophic losses, they could endure where other legions might falter. The Ultramarines' resilience in many ways has made them the epitome of military might, as their internal cohesion and their adherence to military doctrina established by their primarch and the strategic framework within guide their every action, and has made them an ideal fighting force for maintaining order across vast stretches of the galaxy. rather than annihilation missions like the World Eaters and the Blood Angels were. And it was this fact that made them one of the primary targets in the brewing conspiracy of Horus and his allies. The most pivotal moment of this would come at Calth, a world strategically situated at the heart of Ultramar, where the traitors would strike at the very foundation of the Ultramarines' power base. But the tale of this catastrophic betrayal, like many aspects of the Horus Heresy, is not as simple as it seems on the surface. At this time, the legend of the Ultramarines, rather than their history, and that surrounding their primarch, has been carefully crafted and maintained by iterators and remembrancers, both during and after the Great Crusade, in order to show the Ultramarines as a paragon of both order and discipline. However, the Ultramarines were not always such a force. While the Ultramarines have long been the epitome of loyalty and strategic brilliance, order, and nobility, their relations with many other legions was often fraught with no small amount of tension. Some of these interactions were out of rivalry, others out of mistrust, since many saw Guilliman and his sons as empire builders rather than warriors. And later, the Ultramarines' strict and dogmatic adherence to the Codex Astartes, along with their rigid governing structures, often set them apart from other chapters and legions, earning both no small amount of disdain and respect from their fellow warriors. Many of these underlying tensions were largely suppressed by the Great Crusade's overall historical narrative, but would ultimately have rather fractious consequences during the heresy itself and afterwards. And that is why the traitors launched an assault on Calth so early, as the attack was not merely a physical confrontation, but it was the culmination of years upon years of hidden animosities, political maneuvering, whispered betrayals, and a long-standing vendetta over the Ultramarines, and in particular Guilliman's strict adherence to orders. The conspirators, namely the World Eaters and the Word Bearers, knew that the Ultramarines, with their sheer size and might, along with the tactical genius of Guilliman, represented one of the more substantial obstacles to the success of their rebellion. But they also understood the complexities of the Ultramarines' internal politics and military structure, along with the fractious nature of the relations they held with some legions that could be exploited to a great degree. The Battle of Calth and the subsequent events that would follow in the Shadow Crusade did accomplish one thing: the single longest unending conflict in Imperial history, as the Ultramarines believe that the Battle of Calth will be counted as continuing until the last word bearer is slain. So in essence, the Battle of Calth has lasted 10,000 years. This is not only the historical foundation of the Ultramarines, but it is also the myth, the legends, and the very spiritual core of the bloodline of the returned Avenging Sun.